Hello and welcome to the 7th anticipatory briefing of this 2025 GESDA Summit. We are going to talk about ecology in a changing world. Ecosystems are currently reshaped by climate shifts, invasive species and human impact, increasing risks to biodiversity and endangering the services nature provides. How can research on plant adaptation and rapid evolution reveal new ways to predict change and guide conservation and ecosystem restoration over the next 5, 10, and 25 years? This is going to be the subject of a 15-minute presentation followed by 15 minutes of interaction between our speaker and people in the audience. Our speaker is a professor of Botany and Ecology at UNSW Sydney. She flew all the way from Australia to be with us today. Please give a warm round of applause to Angela Mols.
Thank you so much, Laurent, and thank you for all coming to this session. So ecology over the next 25 years is really going to be all about change. I'm going to start with a quote from the great Sir David Attenborough. The truth is, the natural world is changing, and we are totally dependent on that world. It provides our food, water, and air. It is the most precious thing we have, and we need to defend it. Now, to defend it, we need to learn how to understand it better, and we also need to shift the ways we approach conservation and restoration. So, the context is, of course, ecosystems facing major change. The biggest two issues over the next 25 years will be climate change and land use change. There are, of course, other things going on. There are biological invasions, there are some horrible pollutants and things. These things are having some really negative effects. But I think they're actually going to be sideliner acts relative to the impacts of climate change and land use change. So, at the moment, it's already clear that many species and ecosystems are changing. I think it's been about 5 years now since somebody said to me, so when do you think we'll start seeing things change? They've stopped asking that because it's here. We also stand at a time where we've got unprecedented data availability, computing power, and technology. So there's lots of reasons to hope that our understanding will be able to improve quite rapidly. And really importantly, we're in a changing societal environment. People are starting to talk a lot more about Indigenous involvement, about community involvement, about reassessing the human place in ecosystems. And I think that's a really positive thing. So, the nerdy upside is that ecologists are going to have unprecedented opportunities to study ecosystems responding to change. We are, of course, also going to be needed to help manage those impacts. And I actually think that quite a lot of the policymakers are going to be quite surprised by how little we know about our ecosystems and how they assemble at the moment. Okay, so where are we going? In the next 5 years, really confident there's going to be a lot more data. At the moment, we have a lot of data that's sort of presence-only data. Some person saw this species in this place in this year. With greater technology and spectral imaging and things, I think we're going to shift from that to having proper information about the abundance of species, really full information about where the distributions of those species are, the traits of the species, the genetics, the environmental conditions. We'll know more about those. And I'm also kind of hopeful that instead of just knowing the conditions at your nearest weather station, we'll actually start having more information about what's happening at the scale of the individuals that we're studying. So, lots more data. And the other thing I really hope here is that the data becomes more global. At the moment, when you do global scale analyses, you have a lot of data from Europe, and a lot of data from North America, and there's lots of the world that's not very well covered. I think that that's going to get better with the technological advances. We also obviously have increases in our data analysis capability, and I think that's going to be really important because ecology, like economics, has hundreds, if not thousands, of factors influencing the assembly of ecosystems, and they all interact with each other. So it's just wildly complicated to try and analyze what's going on. So, putting those opportunities together, I hope we're going to have a much better understanding of species distributions and the factors that actually shape those, and a much better grasp on population viability, which means we're going to be better able to predict how species are going to respond to climate change, and at the moment our predictions are not that great. And we're also going to be able to better target our conservation efforts. In terms of the plants, there's going to be some changes as well. We can already see some changes, but they are getting faster through time. So distribution shifts will become really obvious within 5 years. So at the moment, it's pretty fast. So for plants, an analysis that included studies of 6,000 different species from various parts of the world, the average rate of change in the distribution location for these species was 900 meters per year. It's pretty fast for organisms with roots, hey? So we've also got them shifting up and down mountains as well. So an average of 3 meters per year of elevation, which if you live in a place like Australia, means you're going to find the top of the mountain very soon. Now, these distribution shifts have real implications for reserve design. In the past, we've been able to sort of put national parks around our favourite species and go, great, we've made that one safe. But if they're moving at almost 1 kilometre per year, how long is it going to be before your favourite species is no longer in your favourite national park? Not that long. And in fact, in some cases, they may have shifted to another country by now, where they may be seen as an invader because they weren't there before. So one thing that's interesting out of this is we're going to have a think about, well, how we think about looking after species. You hear biologists say two things, and I don't know if anyone's picked up the cognitive dissonance that's going on here. You hear people say, oh, I hope my favourite species is able to migrate in order to keep pace with climate change. And you go, great. But you also hear people, and particularly alpine ecologists or Arctic ecologists, say, we've got to defend our precious ecosystem against invaders who are coming in from other places. So the alpine ecologists are very worried about species moving up from the lowlands and destroying the really precious things at the tops of the mountains. Now, this brings up a rather interesting point, and I'll just highlight this with my Astelia saccharocaris, which is in the Australian alpine zone. You can see it's been rocketing uphill by about 10 meters per year over the last 20 years. If we said, okay, well, that species, it didn't used to occur much above about 2,000 meters, which is high in Australia, by the way. And we went, okay, we'll stop it from going any higher than that. You can see that within about another 20 years, if we stopped it from moving up, it would become extinct. So what I'm going to propose to you is that we have a version of the trolley problem. Now, this is a philosophy thing where, you know, you've got the train coming down the tracks and it's going to run over a bunch of people, but the person's standing there and you can pull a lever and divert the train onto a side rail where you'll only kill one person. And people wonder about that and they go, well, it's murder to actually do something that results in the death of that person, but you're mitigating the deaths of other people. So the philosophers think about that. I propose the botanical version of that problem, where we have our alpine ecosystem, and if we let climate change just come down the tracks, then it's going to be lost. If we pull that lever, we could potentially kill instead the Astelia. What should we do there? And it gets more complicated because, of course, it's not just one species that's trying to move up the mountain. Okay, to the 10-year horizon, here I want to talk about rapid evolution, because within 10 years, I think we're really going to start to see changes in our favourite plant and animal species. And there are changes already visible. Some of the changes that are most obvious are in introduced species. And the one that's on the board here is an introduced species that my lab and I studied for about a decade. It's called Arctotheca populifolia. It's a daisy that grows on sand dunes at the beach, very nice. It was introduced to Australia from South Africa in the 1930s. And it only came once, so we were able to use genetics to figure out which beach in South Africa the Australian plants came from. We then grew them in the glasshouse together, and as you can see, the Australian version and the South African version of this species are now very, very different. Their morphology is different, their physiology is different, and their reproductive ecology is so different that they would not be able to interbreed very well. For a start, they don't flower at the same time, which kind of slows you down on swapping genes. But if you do make them cross, the seeds do substantially worse if they're hybrid between the two types than if they're just a purebred. So, what we have here is a species that within 100 years has probably changed enough that we can call it a new species now. We are also seeing changes in lots of plant and animal species in response to climate change. And my question here is, how long will it be before people are sitting and they're looking at a type specimen that was collected by, say, Linnaeus, and they're looking at the modern version of the plant and going, these aren't the same thing. And this has got kind of fun implications for taxonomy and nomenclature. We've kind of been assuming that our species would stay the same over ecological time, and I don't think that's going to be the case. Basically, evolution just keeps showing us that where there's a strong selective pressure, and there will be strong selective pressures, there are fast changes. Okay, so over 25 years, there's a lot going on. First up is we have distribution shifts. Now, I already told you these are fast. What I didn't tell you is that they're not even all in the same direction. Different taxa are moving at wildly different rates, and 37% of those 6,000 species that we got data together for are moving the wrong way. Instead of moving to cooler areas, they're moving to warmer areas. And we don't have a full explanation for why that is yet. We can't really predict which ones or in which places will do that. So we've got lots of distribution shifts going on, we've got rapid evolution going on, we've got invasions going on, and obviously we will have some extinctions going on. So we are going to have dramatic ecosystem change within the next 25 years. And if that sounds like an absurd time frame, then I have some pictures for you. This is from Tosa Bay in Japan, and all of these pictures were taken within a couple of 100 meters of each other. Basically, in the 1990s, this place was a lovely kelp bed. By the late 90s, the water had warmed up substantially, the sea urchin abundance had increased, and those urchins started to graze down those kelp beds. Till in the year 2000, you can see an urchin barrens, and then by 2013, we've got a coral reef, which is kind of crazy. We can also look back over geological time and look at paleontology to see what did happen last time the world changed a lot. And the evidence I've got up here on the board is from North America. This greyish blue area here is the Great Laurentide ice sheet. That's the one that was like 8 kilometres thick over Montreal 21,000 years ago. And you can see through time, over those years, the ice sheet shifts around and vanishes. Now, also on these maps, you can see colours. Doesn't matter what the different colours are, but each different colour represents a different biome, just a level of organisation even higher than a community. And what I wanted to show you here is it doesn't take long going back through time before you start seeing colours on the map that are not present on the modern day map. That is, there are whole biomes that used to be present that aren't present now. And when you drill down, it turns out those biomes with no modern analogue live under climatic conditions that have no modern analogue. Taking that forward, within the next century, we absolutely will have lots of parts of the world where there's climatic conditions unlike anything we presently have. And my conclusion is that we're probably going to have whole different communities. So we are designing reserve systems for communities that we've never seen. All of this change means a couple of things. The first thing is it means that the backwards-looking focus of conservation and restoration isn't going to work into the future. It's increasingly just a futile attempt to hold back the tide. Personally, not sure that 1788 was the perfect year in Australia anyway. But that is what our conservation goals have been. And to really help our biodiversity through, we have to refocus from that backwards-looking goal to how can we maximise the proportion of our amazing species that we still have with us into the future, even if they're in different assemblages. The other interesting implication here is that the ecosystems that we have at the moment are going to be changing through time. So the biodiversity offset schemes and everything else that require these to be fixed entities actually really need to start thinking, what are we going to do when that ecosystem that we've been trading on as if it's a currency is changing? So, to conclude, there's going to be a lot of change and we need to adapt. But it's not all bad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Please raise your hand and we're going to bring you the microphone. If there, oh, here we go. Please introduce yourself briefly and ask your question.
Thanks a lot for a very interesting talk, Sabine Gollner from the NIOS. Question. So you pointed out that you have really a rapid evolution of species, like new species evolve within a couple of decades. Do you also expect a shift in biomass and ecosystem function, and how would this be linked to shifts in biodiversity?
Ooh, yes. Yes, I think there's going to be enormous shifts in biomass. There was a paper published this week in Nature saying that Australia's tropical rainforests have gone from being carbon sinks to carbon sources. And there's going to be just enormous changes in ecosystems. To go back to Australia, in the 2019-2020 bushfires, a whole lot of our rainforests burned. And they can come back from that once. But if they burn again before those rainforest plants have grown up and matured and set crops of seeds, then it's not going to come back as rainforest again. It's going to come back as a whole different ecosystem that's better able to deal with fire. So we're going to see enormous changes in biodiversity. There is going to be a lot of loss, and it's really about minimising that loss and maximising the space and scope for our ecosystems to form new shapes and to thrive in that new world.
Hi, Renzo Lasita from the Villar Institute. I wanted to ask about invasive species. Obviously, earlier you mentioned sea urchins, which are notorious for destroying kelp beds. But I wanted to ask, to what extent are the impacts of invasive species exacerbated by climate change, i.e. the warming for sea urchins? And what do you think their impact would look like in the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So here's the thing. When I was taught ecology at university, I was taught in New Zealand, and I was taught this hopelessly colonial stuff about basically these species from Europe. They came over and they outcompeted the funny little species from New Zealand. And you stop and you go, wait, that's ridiculous. Why would a species from a whole different place be better than the native plants at growing in a new country? And the answer is that you get the introduced species not usually in undisturbed ecosystems, but where humans have changed something. So where I live in Sydney, if you don't let things burn, you get a whole lot of introduced species. If you add nutrients, you get a whole lot of introduced species. So with respect to climate change, absolutely. What that's going to do is change the conditions. It might be the temperatures, it might be the rainfall regimes, it might be how often the fires are coming and how intense they are when they come. But the new conditions mean that there's a chance for an invader who's evolved somewhere else to come in and actually do well. So absolutely, I expect more introduced species. There's also, I think, though, I showed you a species that's changed so much that it's actually speciated. Ecologists used to worry that, we'd end up with the same species all over the world. I actually think we've accidentally made a big speciation event where we're going to have plantagos of different species on each continent now.
Can we get the microphone back and here?
Hi, I'm sorry if you addressed this at the beginning of your presentation, but I'd like to have your thoughts about de-extinction.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah. Look, I think it's really cool. I think there's some really cool technologies. I am on the New South Wales, I'm the chair of the New South Wales Threatened Species Scientific Committee. We're the ones that assess things and go, yep, that's critically endangered, you have to list it now. We are losing these things so quickly. We can't even list them fast enough to keep up with what's happening. I think it's fun and cool to be able to bring some back. But I think if we are fooling ourselves that we can just put it all back later, yeah. So I'm not against it, but I don't think it's a silver bullet.
Hello, thank you. Very, very interesting. One question, you are quite positive about how nature evolves. What about humans? What have you learned from nature that we can take up as humans to adapt in this changing world and our relationship with nature?
Yeah, that's really more of a question for sociologists than for me. But I actually have some optimism there as well. The younger generation are really different. So having grown up with the internet, with all of the facts available at any given moment, I think this has led to a really different mindset. We also have a much more socially progressive youth in general. And I think it's going to be really interesting over the next 2 or 3 decades as we really shift the generations to see how we start managing the world. And I am optimistic that people are going to do a better job of being a bit more aware of the human role in ecosystems. Because it is something that we do change through time, right? Like if you go back 100 years, then Europeans were, maybe 200 years, Europeans were colonizing places and enriching the floras and faunas to make it more like what you've got here. And we now look at that and go, oh, that's a complete disaster. What were they thinking? But then we went through a phase of thinking that ecology really happened in pristine nature reserves only. And I think the rise of urban ecology and the understanding of the role of Indigenous people and just everybody in shaping their ecosystem, I think we're going in the right direction. Not entirely, though.
One thing that is changing, Angela, is also that now we start to feel the economical impact of mismanaging ecology. And typically, if you live in Florida, now it becomes hard to get your house insured. And I mean, that's a big difference, is that the economical cost is happening. We can start to measure it.
Yes.
Do you think it's going to trigger some response from corporations and the private sector?
I think it already has. I've been absolutely astounded by how much of the positive environmental action has been led by corporations rather than by governments. I would not have predicted that 10 years ago.
The other change that I find interesting is that it feels like finally we start talking about climate change as an opportunity. It's like there was this divide between the US with drill, baby drill, and China investing a lot in solar. And people think that China is doing that for political reasons, but they're doing it for pragmatic reasons because it's just a cheaper. And so now ecology is also becoming a business opportunity, right? That's another change in how it's perceived.
It is. And I don't think we're doing that perfectly yet. So for instance, the biodiversity offset schemes that I talked about, they're relying on the idea that ecosystems are fixed units, and I know that's not the case. So we're not perfect, but we are, again, moving in the right direction. Whether we can move fast enough, whether we can stop really dumb things like such high rates of land clearing in time is a really interesting question, because the consequences just get worse the longer we leave it.
Question.
Thank you. Alex Antonelli. I work with GESDA on the Eco-Augmentation Initiative, but I'm also Director of Science at the Robotics United Q in the UK. You're very optimistic about what we can do and also restoration looking forward. The Global Biodiversity Framework while setting this target of 30 by 30 in terms of restoration, do you see any challenges in terms of moving at speed at the same time as getting it right? How do you reflect on that?
Oh, absolutely. So 30 by 30, I've still no idea how New South Wales is going to go from like 17% to 30% within the next how many years? Yes. I think, though, we're working in the right direction. It's the same with the carbon targets, right? Not everybody is hitting what they were hoping to, but we're moving in the right direction. Again, whether it's fast enough is a really interesting question. And the restoration efforts, it's the decade of restoration at the moment, and there's all sorts of major tree planting initiatives, although in some countries that's largely been putting in a whole bunch of plantation trees. You're like, So, yes, we could absolutely do better, but at least this stuff is now on the radar, and it has real space in, I think, most countries' political systems. There's, the new trend is nature positive. So to actually go from let's slow down our impact to how can we make things get better? And I think that is being forced by people noticing that there are real consequences to this. Because, if you go back to 2 decades, people were like, an extra degree or warmer, that sounds nice. And they really couldn't see the downside to it. Now it's become quite clear.
Yeah, and it's hitting us in the wallet, which usually gets people moving and interested.
It's a motivator.
The last point you made, I thought was very interesting. The way I understood is that you say we have this idea that we need to preserve nature in its exact state and keep it as it is. But you're saying that we actually, without us noticing, it's actually constantly evolving, and we have to embrace the fact that A, we cannot control it, and B, it's good that it changes, right? So it's all about also changing our perception.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd put a judgment call on is it good that it's changing? It's just changing.
But it's been forever changing around us, right?
Exactly. You can't look at paleontology without going, there's been extinctions and change and evolution and adaptation and shift of distribution, also at rates that we don't understand, for forever. And so the idea that we can put something back to its perfect historic state was always flawed.
And could ecosystems sometimes benefit from us being more hands-off and not trying to direct them? Because, for example, in some countries, when we take down the trees, then we replant them in a very mechanical way, instead of just letting the forest coming back to life after a fire, for example, which happens spontaneously.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's the valley where I grew up was in New Zealand, and New Zealand is quite British, and so we used to celebrate Guy Fawkes Day, which was this bizarre celebration of the plot to blow up the British Parliament. And so we'd set off fireworks, and every year the hills would be on fire. New Zealand plants, they're not supposed to burn very often. And so all of the hills were just covered in Ilex europaeus, like gorse and broom. Fireworks got banned because of all the safety issues and the horrific things done to pets and things. It's just regenerated. It's all gone back to being native stuff because we stopped doing something dumb. Yeah, stopping harpooning whales was really effective also.
It could be a call to action. Stop doing dumb things. Let's get that as the closing words. Please give a warm round of applause to Angela Moles. Thank you very much, Angela.